there's pretty good data that when the high fructose corn syrup was introduced, that total sugars, added sugars, started going up, because it wasn't like regular sugar intake went way down as high fructose corn syrup went up. Maybe during those few years, yes, but in general, what we see is that the total intake of added sugars started really going up around 1980. And that means high fructose corn syrup and table sugars. So we think of both of them as not as bad. Interestingly, when I compare high fructose corn syrup to regular sugar in animal models, high fructose corn syrup is generally a little worse. And we can talk about why that is. It's partly because of the higher fructose content, but it also gets absorbed differently because table sugar has to be broken up once you eat it into fructose and glucose. So there's a little bit of a delay in splitting the fructose and glucose. Whereas when you drink high fructose corn syrup, they both hit the system very quickly.
The other issue that we have to throw on top of that is the fact that high fructose corn syrup is a solution. Sucrose is a crystal. Okay? Right. And you can only add so much sugar to something before it crystallizes.
Right.
All right. This is why Chips Ahoy cookies tasted gritty in the old days, because they would try to plow as much sugar as they could into the Chips Ahoy cookies. Okay. But then when they would bake them, when they would cool, they would crystallize. And so there was a limit to how much they could put in. Well, then with high fructose corn syrup, because it's miscible, because it's already in solution, because it's a monosaccharide, two monosaccharides rather than a disaccharide, okay, it's already in solution. They found that they could add more. And in doing so, they didn't get the crystallization problem. And then they realized that the more they added, the more people bought, because fructose is addictive. And so that really sort of started the race to the top in terms of how much sugar can we put in the American diet. And that's the thing that just skyrocketed things. And that happened in the 1980s. And now, of course, we're suffering the aftermath of that.
And there's another trick that they did, and that is with the high fructose corn syrup. They could add a lot more, but they could also add very little amounts and mix it into foods where it was just so subtle that. But if you like wheat thins and things like this, which have high fructose corn syrup, and you don't really think that there's sugar in there, right? Or high fructose corn syrup, you wouldn't. But if you just carefully taste it, you can say, "Oh my, it is a little sweet." And one of the things our work did is we took animals that could not taste sugar. Okay, we genetically altered them so they had no taste, and they still are addicted to sugar. So even when you don't taste sugar, you will be addicted. You can get addicted to it, and they become obese, and they search out. You can have two things of water, and one has sugar in it, and one does not, or high fructose corn syrup, and the mouse will be able to identify and still seek out that water that has a high fructose corn syrup, even if it can't taste it, and it will get fat. And so this is the problem. I mean, is that, if you put a little bit of sugar in the food where you can't really taste it, your body can still sense it. Your brain senses it and gets this kind of craving. So you end up eating these foods that have subtle amounts of sugar, and you eat more and more, and over time, of course, you get a big sugar load. It's a trick.
So we know that 37% of the added sugar in our diet comes from soft drinks. 16% comes from candy, cakes, ice cream, things that we normally identify as dessert. That means that a full 49% of the added sugar in our diet comes from stuff we didn't know had, like salad dressing, like barbecue sauce, like hamburger buns, like hamburger meat. Okay.
Yes. And so the processed food industry realizes that they can put small amounts of sugar in or add a little bit more, and it makes it particularly tasty. Like the ketchup in McDonald's is a little sweeter than regular ketchup. And that attracts kids and go, oh, I love the ketchup taste. And so you can do the processed foods. They want you to buy it rather than make your own hamburger. And so they will put, a little bit extra sugar, a little extra salt to specifically draw you in to buy that stuff. Hey, we're being a tag team, Rob.
It's very simple, Sarah. Fructose is addictive, and we're trying desperately to get the FDA and the WHO to understand that, because if they understand that, then food policy could potentially change.
Because the reality is no one is binging on a ribeye steak, right? That's not what is happening. And Rob, I've heard you talk about the fact that, okay, squeeze 5 oranges, have some orange juice, and then you're asking for breakfast, eat 5 oranges and you want to throw up, right? Because of the fiber. So you're taking out the fiber. So you can pack those calories and the sweetness and the salt bomb for your brain to become addicted in a lot less, so you don't become physically full as quickly. And so and to touch on the meat thing, it was funny. I actually got a package of Wagyu premium hot dogs, and I look at the ingredients, and there is high fructose corn syrup. And here I am eating meat, and they're putting it in that food because it's hitting the gut, telling the brain, I want more. And so it's more of an overconsumption process too. It's like making the problem exponentially worse. And what I want to get into also is, because I've got 3 kids that are athletes, and I just was at a collegiate race, and you've got these big women that are super strong, and they just finished their race, and they're pulling out their Rice Krispie treats. I'm no joke. And these are elite athletes. And I'm thinking, does anyone teach them anything? But in that case, those girls are really looking for energy. That's the purpose of food, right? And we're talking about ATP as true cellular energy. But we have also talked about the fact that processed foods and high fructose corn syrup steals ATP from the body, right?
All right. I have a very simple question for you. Who won the Patriots Day Marathon yesterday?
No idea.
2 Ethiopians. Okay. The question is, do they eat sugar? Not a bit. Not a bit.
Very well said.
They have more energy than you, Sarah, who are clearly athletic, and your kids, and Rick and I all put together will ever have, and they don't eat sugar. In fact, a lot of NBA stars now are sugarless.
Yes.
And the reason is because they've learned that they actually run better on ketones than they do on glucose. And one of the reasons is because they've learned that sugar decreases mitochondrial ATP generation. And there's 3 enzymes. There are 3 enzymes that fructose specifically inhibits. One is AMP kinase, the fuel gauge on the liver cell. Number 2, ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary to cleave fats into 2 carbon fragments so they can be burned by mitochondria. And finally, CPT1A, which is the enzyme that generates carnitine, which is necessary to shuttle the fats into the mitochondria for burning in the first place. Bottom line, fructose is a irreversible mitochondrial toxin.
Yeah, and Rob.
So adding sugar to something because you think that that's going to give you energy is actually a fallacy.
Yeah, and I'll add, it also inhibits an enzyme called aconitase in the Krebs cycle and enol-CoA hydratase in the beta fatty acid cycle. I'm sure no one really wants to know that. But bottom line is, fructose absolutely inhibits mitochondrial function. Now, what makes it, this kind of interesting dilemma is, you can say, well, why is it that these super athletes can eat Rice Krispies and still win contests? And issue is that, there was this myth that that your mitochondria of these super athletes is immune to sugar. That's not true. But what is true is that the mitochondria of super athletes are usually incredible. They're producing huge amounts of ATP. And so they can eat a little bit of fructose and reduce their ATP and still be making a huge amount of ATP and still outrun you. Yeah, for sure. But if they keep doing it, they will eventually, reduce their mitochondrial ATP and get into trouble. And if they want to win contests, you don't want to, even if you're a super athlete, you don't want to reduce your mitochondrial function by 5% because you're up against other people with the same kind of mitochondria. So
that is a question in my house a lot, where my husband will say, Sara, if it's so bad for you, then why are all these athletes eating all of that sugar? Well, those athletes were the guys that won AYSO soccer in kindergarten and blew everyone away because of their genetics that have carried them a little further. And they have, and maybe the mitochondrial failure is going to maybe show up more as a brain fog in their 40s, or hair loss, or vitiligo, or cancer. And it's not showing up as a lack of athleticism in the current day. So, nothing's for free, right?
So the sports drink companies added fructose specifically to energy drinks. The original Gatorade, invented and patented in 1965 by Dr. Robert Cade at the University of Florida, where Rick used to work. So he knows more about this than I do, but I'm on the train right now, so let me finish. Okay. What was that original Gatorade? It was glucose, it was sodium, and it was water. It was basically an oral rehydration solution, the same thing we give to cholera victims in India in order to get water transport across the intestinal brush border in order to maintain plasma volume, because if you were dehydrated, that reduced your performance. Did you ever taste the original Gatorade, Sara?
I don't think I'm old enough.
It tasted like tiger piss. It tasted awful. It had glucose. It tasted horrible. Okay. Nobody but an elite athlete dehydrated on the gridiron would ever touch this stuff. Okay.
Yeah,
that was Philly's Gatorade. In 1992, Pepsi buys Gatorade, says, how are we going to market this swill? So what they do, they did two things: Michael Jordan and high fructose corn syrup. And now, who's drinking the Gatorade? The fat kids.
Right.
Yeah. The original Gatorade, Jesse said, tasted so bad that when Bob Cade tried it out on the football players, the first guy spit it out, and the second guy took it and said, he says, I know how to use it. And he poured it over his head. And then Cade said, well, at least I'm helping him cool off.